and yeah, the go live button is pressed.
So exciting.
It's so dramatic.
So much drama.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, wow. All right. Now we wait for the tape delay to see. I have an ad, a Reese's peanut butter egg ad. There it is.
Oh,
I see
wow.
me.
You
I
can
see
see-
you.
Yeah.
This is
Which is the most important thing. John only does this every week so that he gets to see himself on the internet.
That's right. I'm a big star. I tell my kids I'm a YouTuber, and they're like, "Wow, that's cool."
I'm sure it is.
Wow, hooray! Okay, so let's see if we can break things at all by I'll remind people that I love the community, and I will share my desktop, and we'll see what happens.
All right. Let's let them
So-
bask in the glory of your screen.
Yep,
By the way,
yep.
hello everybody. I
Hello.
apologize for being late. There was some technical difficulties.
So,
There was so everybody was gone.
Yeah.
James is out, Damien was out, all the Channel 9 helpers that usually help us set this up, and we still figured it out, and I'm proud of us. So
Okay.
Um,
I'll move.
yes,
Yeah. So okay, I'll try and deal with us being quiet for you, people in person in chat.
You'll-
Thanks for letting us know.
yeah, thanks for letting us know. You'll regret letting us know later. but
Yeah.
that's a different
We've been more
conversation.
Yeah.
concerned with getting things to appear on the screen up to now.
yeah. Please do give us the feedback, though.
Yes, please.
Okay, so I will run through things. First of all, I'm using the Edge dev channel, the new newly released. It's exciting. I'm using this one tab extension to share all the community links, and so this actually works. It's a Chrome extension. I'm using it in the latest Edge dev channel, so very exciting. So my first link here is from the Visual Studio 2019 launch, and this is Daniel Ross' presentation on web apps. It was, all the stuff. So all the web dev stuff in Visual Studio 2019. Everyone loved it. It is a great watch. So make sure you catch that. We also had, all the content was good. I mean, I really liked the keynote. There was a lot of really good content. So good stuff. Getting a report that the YouTube chat is not working. Honestly, I'm not sure. I didn't see a way to enable that. We can watch on Twitter, or we can take some questions on Twitch too if you do want to chat. So we're just happy we got the stream going. Okay, so next link here we got is from Shahed. He's continuing his A through Z series with N for .NET. This is .NET Core 3. So this is a great roll-up post of everything that that was in the 2019 release. Some cool kind of standout features in here, or standout things in here. He talks about the templates that are included, .NET Core 3. He mentions this, that you need to enable previews for .NET Core 3 SDK. And he also talks about turning on C# 8 features. So this is kind of cool too. So if you want to play with all the new stuff, Shahed's got you covered.
Yeah, I had some people on Twitter asking for help where they had not realized they needed the preview checkbox.
Yep.
So.
Yep, and just to doubly remind people, here's Ed blogged on this and pointed this out just specifically. So you do need to turn this on. Use previews of .NET Core SDK for this one, and that's a change from the previous release candidates for FIES 2019.
Yep, or use a preview build of Visual Studio. It's like the
Yep.
preview, the public previews will have that kind of enabled by default, I believe, is the experience.
I think you're right. Cool. Okay, cool. From Steve Smith, this is a just a cool bit of middleware that lists the middleware that is installed. So it just kind of does a diagnostic listing of middleware. So for here he's got it as set up as my list all services path, but you can set that to whatever you want, and it'll just give you a diagnostic of installed middleware. So kind of handy. All right, here is the roadmap post on Identity Server 4. So kind of talking about all the stuff that's planned going forward and how that integrates in with ASP.NET Core 3 and the LTS release for post that, etc. So stuff. All right. Then continuing with identity, here's a nice post from Mark, and he's talking about user authentication and identity with Angular, ASP.NET Core, and Identity Server. So this is
Nice.
kind of yeah, it's great. This is a very in-depth post, walking through all the setup, explain. This is one where you grab a cup of coffee and spend a few minutes. But this is I love the detail here. You see all the kind of the animated GIFs and stuff, explaining things, talking through how the authentication flow works, etc. So great detail here, and then walking all the way through, including things like API endpoints, login flow, and Angular setup too. Great stuff. Speaking of Angular, here is Rick Strahl's post on. He's had this. I love seeing these when people do these samples that they update over the years, and so Rick's been updating this album viewer sample. So he's updated this. This is through 2.2 and latest and Angular 6, but he kind of talks through. He's just gone through and updated this. So he tweeted.
I remember this from like several MVP summits ago, and it was cool back then. I'm glad that he kept up with it and he kept updating it.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, you can go in and you can look at his commit history and you can see what he had to change in order to get it to work. So it's very cool.
I remember being jealous at the time. We were just updating like MVC Music Store or something for DNX, and he was like, "Hey, let me show you this cool album viewer," and I was like, "Man, yours looks so much cooler than our MVC Music Store. Like, it looks so pretty."
Yep. Very cool. This is a cool post from Ken. So feature flags is a great thing to enable deploying features, to a production environment or to a stage environment, and to be able to kind of test the runtime behavior by toggling things on and off. So here they're using a strongly typed. He shows how to do that using their feature flags library for strongly typed feature flags. So a lot of the time, feature flags, it's easy to set them up just using a string in config, but using actual strongly typed and then being able to use the feature flag UI is pretty nice. So there kind of shows how to do that, how to configure the UI, and then you end up getting this kind of nice toggle. So that's pretty cool.
Cool.
Sebastian tweeted about the Orchard Core Beta 3 release. So this is great. It's also really cool to see 100+ contributors on that. So here he talks about the docs on contributing or on testing it out, and actual custom demos where you can go through on. This is a live demo site where you go on with try.orchardproject.net.
Yeah, I think if you click that, you can go and like create your own blog and try out a bunch of stuff, right?
Yep. Yeah, this is very cool.
I walked by him the other day, and he actually asked me a question about my blog engine. The last person you want to be in the room with, if you've ever written a blog engine, is Sebastian. He always has lots of questions.
Yeah.
Yep.
And all those questions are designed to basically end the conversation with Orchard is better.
Yeah.
And I think he's probably right almost all the time.
Most of the time
it's amazing the amount of kind of depth of stuff. I've done some interviews with him of like little features that they've built for Orchard, and then they've made available separately, so you can use them just separately in a website as well. So yeah, really cool stuff. We should probably get him back on and have an update on Orchard sometime. That'd be cool.
Yeah.
Okay, this is neat. This is Dev Mentors. They have a whole series of it's a course with a whole series on distributed .NET Core. So, building up, starting with an intro little teaser and, showing things like subscribing with RabbitMQ and, just all kinds of stuff. So this is great. These are, nice series. They're all out on YouTube and nice to go through and see that. So it's putting together a bunch of distributed services here.
Cool. Yeah. I haven't looked through those videos yet, but I intend to. I'm interested in digging in and seeing what they say. Question for Janiscu. I'm not 100% sure on how the Orchard guys do their packaging and versioning and stuff now. But the Twitter for Sebastian that John had open a minute ago, if you go tweet him, he will get back to you and talk to you about what you want and stuff.
Yep. Yeah. This is Sebastian Ross. That's his contact info there. So
yeah.
Cool. All right. My last link before we go to your cool demos. So this is from Tomas, and he's showing. I honestly, if I'd seen ND-JSON before, I'd forgotten it. This is new line delimited JSON. So every line is a valid JSON file.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then he talks about using the fetch API and the streams API in order to kind of hook that up. So you've got your backend is streaming JSON data, and then you're consuming it on the front end. And he's streaming here from a SignalR hub. So I thought this was really cool to use wire some things up using SignalR to stream from the back end, and neat stuff. Brady, had you seen this before?
I did see that. I actually got kind of into that post for a little while.
Cool.
I think I saw a few other posts by this gentleman. We might need to have a meeting. He's got some good stuff out there, so that'd be cool. Yeah.
Cool. Mm-hmm. And that is it for me. I'm ready to stop sharing my screen and pop back over to you.
Okay, so more importantly, can we just talk about for a moment the Stack Overflow survey that somebody just mentioned in chat? Because that's worth calling out. Have you seen this, John?
It's huge.
I have. That is really cool.
Yeah. So for those of you who haven't done it, haven't looked at it, the Stack Overflow 2019 survey came out. There's a bunch of cool information, but as is being called out in chat, .NET Core is the most loved framework, at least in one of the pages, which is great.
That's a good thing. It's a very
Yeah,
good thing.
Yep.
Everybody loves .NET Core, which is good. We're doing a good job. All of you guys and us together are doing a good job of making .NET Core loved.
It's a very good thing.
It is. I'm pretty happy with it.
Hooray! So folks, let us know if you can hear okay.
Yeah, so I've adjusted every level switch, every level knob that I have. One of them made Galloway even louder, so I tried to not have him blow my own eardrums out. And I don't know where the level switch is, where the level knob is to control the audio for this microphone anymore. So I'm going to hope that Brady plays with it a little bit whilst I'm talking to see if we can make it any better. I can see the meter. I can see that I'm soft, and that hopefully I'll be able to see when he fixes it. But unfortunately, I don't know the right thing to turn.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're hearing you're okay, but Brady's quiet.
Yeah, but that's because I'm leaning into my microphone to compensate.
All right.
I'm leaning pretty far. I'll have to talk louder this time. Sorry.
Right. So we'll do our best. And
okay.
Yeah, but ask us to repeat something if you have to, and we'll see how it goes. And I know, Damien, wherever you are, sorry, man. I know that you're cringing somewhere as we speak.
You gotta come to work then.
He did have technical support last week when he was here.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, James.
Okay.
Yeah. So what do you guys got?
I came in a while back. I think for those of you who watch this all the time, I talked a lot about workers and about the new template that we were shipping in Preview 3, and I. Oh, okay, interesting. Thanks, guys. So I'm going to talk more about that. And I'm going to show a lot of the stuff that's happened since last time. And specifically what I'm showing now is stuff that's not in Preview 3, stuff that we've done since we shipped Preview 3. If those of you who want to see more about what we did, there's the Preview 3 announcement and the blog post that I just did like a week or so ago about workers as Windows services. And then today, I'm going to show about a bunch of the stuff that we've done since then. Mm-hmm. So let me jump into this. I have the create new project. I have the create new project screen.
I have to mention this. Earlier today when we were working on one of the demos, Glenn actually referenced his own blog post. Have you ever done that? Yeah. Referenced your own blog post to work through a problem? That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yep. So yeah, for those of you who haven't been following along, one of the things I wanted to do to help out people building kind of message queues, microservice-y type applications was provide a good template for getting started for building services that had all of the kind of ASP.NET Core goodness that you want, configuration, logging, dependency injection, stuff like that, but it wasn't tied to web because you didn't necessarily need a web endpoint all the time. But once you've kind of got your config set up going and you have a kind of fairly consistent way of doing it, you have a logging framework that you use that ties in a particular way. Once you've got a bunch of those things, it's kind of inconvenient to switch all that over when you switch to something like a Windows service or a systemd Linux daemon or some other like system that's running daemons in Linux for you, or a job on ACI or on Kubernetes or any of these things that are kind of running in the background, doing work, doing something for you asynchronously, but not actually exposing web endpoints. If they are exposing web endpoints, well, then you can start with the ASP.NET Core template and call life good, right? So in Preview 3, we created we added this template. You can it's still here in web. So when you create it, you still have to choose web application first, but we're working on that. Let's call this something. Do you have a good name?
Synthwave.
Synthwave?
No.
We've used Synthwave before,
yeah,
funnily enough. We're going to call this stand-up worker. And I think chat's correct that your mic isn't even on, Brady, and leaning in that direction isn't even helping. So when we click create, that'll pop up my second set of options. And you can see here, I think this icon is new. We have this worker service icon, but otherwise it's still the same template options. We can click create, and it's going to make me my worker. And so this gives me a worker template, and then because we wasted all of our setup time setting up for other things, I didn't adjust my fonts and such. So there's a few things that are interesting in here. First one is in Preview 3, this was a web application, and if you notice here, this icon is different, right? It says it's just a little C#.
Yeah.
So if you double click this now and it opens up my CS Proj, then it's not anymore. It's a worker.
Okay.
This is the same as a web application, and now it's not. It's its own SDK, right?
Yeah.
So what this does is it divorces this kind of project type, this template, from a lot of the web features that don't necessarily make sense. But we copied. So the way this works is we went back to console, and then we slowly copied things in, so till we got the kind of feature set that we liked that made sense for the worker. So, for example, you can see over here in my Solution Explorer, I have app settings, and app settings is nested under this, the same as you would see in a web application, because we're using the same config settings, right? So that feature is tied to what is called a project capability, which comes from this worker SDK in this case. And we can go into how it works and everything if people really want, but it's effectively just a bunch of MS build that is kind of implied that we do for you and we ship for you so that it doesn't appear here in your CS Proj. To get all the features that you want in Visual Studio, there'd be like 10 more lines of MS build in here telling you to turn on all the features, and then another few lines saying like, JSON is content, copy the JSON into the bin so that you can get a double clickable bin project when you build and things like that, right? Does that make sense?
Okay. Yep.
Cool. Another thing that we'll be working is on user secrets. So you'll be able to do things like right click, edit user secrets. You can see it right here, manage user secrets. So I can manage user secrets, which even though this is not a web app and normally manage user secrets is only visible when you start using web projects, things of that nature, right? However, it is not a shared framework. So it is an SDK in here, but it is not a shared framework. That's important because of things that we'll do later on, and I'll bring it back up later. But just if people had this association in their head that this meant like thing installed on the machine that I was implicitly referencing, that's not the case for this one. It's just MS build stuff, plus what you get from a console app. It builds on the same one that you would get from from a .NET Core like console application.
Okay.
Cool. So then we have Program CS. Program CS is exactly the same. And then we have this worker.cs. This is exactly the same as well. I think the only thing we changed here is we changed what this log method does. Previously, I believe it was using string interpolation, and now it is not.
Wonder why.
It's not, because string interpolation is slower than doing this.
Okay.
For starters, so we didn't want to put the kind of a known kind of the most slow way that you can log with this is to use string interpolation. There's kind of 3 main ways to do it, and the slowest one is with string interpolation, and we didn't want to put you down that path by default. Basically, it's not too bad. We're talking about nanoseconds or microseconds or something of that sort.
So is it really worth it? I mean,
this is not. It might not be if we were talking about like really mangling your code. This is also slightly better for if you're using something like Serolog, where Serolog knows about what this structure is, because this name starts to appear with this data associated with it and things like that. So this is also better if you're doing those sorts of logs, which is why I kind of wanted to show this versus the other way of doing it.
Okay.
I do have some micro benchmarks that show the difference, and if there's time at the end and people want to see that, they can throw it into chat, and I can show you a benchmark. I can show you how fast the different ways of logging are and what the trade-offs are and what the code looks like and all that. We can get right into that if people are keen. Otherwise we'll just leave it.
Or maybe we could do like a whole show on benchmarking.
We could possibly do that too.
That'd be fun too.
But, yeah.
You were right about the button, by the way.
So, by the way, minor update for the stream. Chat is working in YouTube. If it's not, just refresh the page. So if you're on YouTube and you don't have chat, you have to refresh the page and you'll get the chat happening.
Excellent. I'm glad we worked out this all ahead of time. And everybody seems like we know what we're doing here.
Sure.
Good.
We'll fix it all in post.
Yeah, that's right. We'll fix it in post. Yeah, it's just us and a few of our friends watching. It'll be fine.
Yep.
We'll get it fixed before we post it later. Okay, so that's the main differences you see visibly, right? But there's a few other things that are different. Because it's not a web app anymore after render async. I like it. Nice. Yeah. So if you right click and publish now, you see some different options as well. So previously you saw basically everything that a web app, every target that a web app has when you click right click and publish, even if they didn't necessarily make sense. Now you see web jobs.
Okay.
So this works. You can publish and it'll create you a Azure App Service, and it will publish you this application as a web job, which just runs within the context of your app service plan forever, right? And you have the dashboard. You can turn on and off web jobs. If those of you who have used web jobs from in the past, it's exactly the same. And then
I think I forget and ask this every time you talk about workers, so I apologize. Yeah. But is there opportunity to use this in functions, Azure Functions as well?
So if you add the WebJobs SDK to this project, so if you go into your dependents, if you go and add the WebJobs SDK NuGet package, and then you come in here and you say like .use WebJobs, I believe is the name of the method you get when you add that package, then you can write functions in this. And it uses the WebJobs SDK, which is the same underpinnings as functions. And then you can write the source code that is exactly the same as an Azure function. There's a couple of things that are kind of specific to the hosted Azure functions, like HTTP WebJobs. But in general, you'll be able to write pretty much the same code, I believe. And then it'll be the same. It'll be copy and pastable between like a function or this thing. And in what's happening, what the difference is that in this case, your application, your program is hosting web jobs and running your web jobs for you. Whereas in the Azure Functions case, we're taking care of hosting your functions and executing them for you. Things like that, right? So there is an intersection there in that regard, because the new WebJobs SDK is built upon this same builder that the worker template is built upon, and the and ASP.NET Core is now built upon. So if we were to have a web job template, for example, it would be this with the WebJobs package, and then you would have a web job that did the same thing, right?
Okay.
That makes sense. Cool. It's kind of more and more flexible, right? The way that I think about this is it's starting to get down to the point where you can write the same code, and then all you're really doing is deciding, where do I want to host it? If it's possible, do I want to host it as a function, or do I want to host it do I want it to run all the time on Kubernetes? Do I want it as an ACI, like an Azure Container instance? Do I want it as a web job? And like that's kind of dependent on what makes you happy and which of those models you like. But we're getting all the blockers out of the way to make the code be mostly the same. Right?
That's great. Cool.
The big difference is that WebJobs SDK dependency. If you want to go to functions, you'll probably want that web dependency, even if you're not necessarily there yet. Things like that, right?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. if you're watching Fabio, I know you watch sometimes. Everybody loves web jobs too. Fabio's the guy that works on web jobs a lot. Okay, so we have a program. We have a program. It is running. I can Control F5 it, and I get the console. I have a console app, right? Effectively. So now, and all it does is log forever. Right.
Well, I mean, we have a console app, but what's nice about it is that you have all the DI, IOC, and all the plumbing and stuff. That, are idioms that we.
Yeah, it uses the logging framework. If you say add Serolog, or you say add nlog, you say whatever logging framework you're going to use, or if you switch the IOC container with something else, like all those things work exactly as they work in an ASP.NET Core application. So if you're a guy who's built a few web APIs, and then now what you're going to do is do some asynchronous work where you, the canonical case here is something like, I'm going to take, I've got a request that comes in on a web API. I'm going to stash some data, and then I've got a worker that's going to run later. Something else is going to operate on that data later and do something else. Maybe you stash some data, and then later on a worker picks it up and sends emails, or you put a message on a queue, and then later on a worker takes the message off the queue and does some work and does something to it. I view this as a foundation for building all of those types of things. Right?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And so, and then whilst, if you're doing the message queue thing, maybe you're pulling in a messaging queue library, maybe you're using NService Bus or Mass Transit or EasyQ or something, or if you're, or whatever, maybe you're just using the Azure SDKs to be able to use blob storage to do stuff, pull files off of blob storage and process them and then produce something else, right? The key is to all this is it's kind of long running, because by default, we assume the console app's going to run forever until the app decides to stop or someone else stops it. Mm-hmm. And it's gonna, and you want all of these DI config logging dependency injection. Like I said DI twice, it's that important.
It's that important,
right?
So this gets you down to a place like it's dialed in, going back a ways, but to like when Scott Hanselman would talk about the Lego pieces being the right size, right? Mm-hmm. So this is something where a full ASP.NET app is too big. That's maybe a little Duplo in this case, but I don't want like to be like building up from a console app where it's like I have to pull in all this DI and logging and all this stuff. Right. So here you've kind of right-sized it to something that's good for a microservice kind of thing, or a small little worker.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute, because I'm going to build a Docker image, and so we'll talk a little bit about the base image that I use and which pieces are coming with me in a moment. So let's go make this be a Windows service though, because we know that everybody loves it. So I'm going to add, all I did here was I added this new NuGet package, Microsoft Extensions hosting Windows services. That gives me a new method over here. We renamed this method. It's called use Windows services now. It's kind of more parallels the use IIS. It was called like use Windows service based lifetime before, which was technically correct, the best kind of correct, but not necessarily nice. So it's called use Windows service. Now I can build, if I build this, now I can still, if I'm running it here, it still runs as a console app. So one of the key points I want to make here is this method is like use IIS. It does nothing when you're not running as a Windows service. Right?
Okay.
So
right. So it turns on things that if you run as a Windows service, then it's all configured for it. But if you run as console app, it's kind of like a no-op.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
And so that's nice, because you don't want to like dev against the Windows service generally. You kind of want to run it as a console app. So then if I come over here, I have this is an admin shell. I'm going to say SC. I have a few here in history. I'm going to create a new one. Look, see, there was Synthwave that we created earlier with Brady. And what is this one called? It's called standupworker.exe. So something to note here is I am running it directly from bin, because it can. Like when I build this, my bin has an exe. I can double click it, it runs.
Yeah, okay.
And so what I'm doing here is I'm saying create me a Windows service. This is the exe, and it's just pointing straight at bin. I'm doing that because I kind of think that's cool, and I wanted to show you doing it. You may or may not do that in your own. You might do it on your own dev machine. The only interesting thing will be is if the service is running, the exe will be locked, so Visual Studio is going to struggle to build your app. So stand up worker. Now I have this thing called stand up worker, and I can start it, and I can stop it. Oh, it's already started, right? And it's running, and I can stop it, and I can restart it. And it's a Windows service, right?
So to remind people that haven't, and honestly, I haven't messed with Windows services for a while. I mean, one nice thing is you can set things like start policy. You can have it activation and start when Windows starts, and you can also set who it logs in as, like the context that it runs as, right?
That's right.
Are those kind of some of the main reasons you'd want to use a Windows?
Absolutely. You want something that runs forever. If the machine reboots, you want it to start up when the machine reboots. You don't want to have like, you don't want to log into a machine as you, double click on the exe and have it running, and then lock the machine and leave it sitting there in the server room.
Yes.
That's bad.
Yeah.
That's old school.
People in chat are like, oh man.
Now,
Yeah.
while we're talking about this is obviously a Windows service.
Yep.
There's also, like in the Linux world, or there's like a concept of a daemon, or
Yeah,
there's
absolutely.
other.
So I have a blog post coming up that I have to finish writing, which shows you how to do this with systemd. Well, the way it works on Linux is you build the same binary. It's exactly the same app, even if it has, even with use Windows Service in it if you want. Nope, I don't believe you, Steve-O. So you could take the same binary, you create a file, configuration file in the case of systemd, like a unit file, and it's got like 4 or 5 lines basically telling their system the same thing that we just told Windows by running that command, and then it runs the same way. It has a lot of the same features. There's kind of an arc of kind of niceness that we can layer on top of that we might do one day in the future. Like we can integrate better with the journaling system that's built into Linux. We can allow you to do watchdogging, where Linux systemd, for example, has a feature where it can if you don't talk to it for X amount of time, it'll restart you, and then you can write code in your app to say keep telling it to keep me alive, so that you can do some watchdogging. There's a whole bunch of stuff we can do like that. I'll talk about it in a blog post, but basically if you search for create systemd service, there's a small default getting started config file you'll find real quick. Take one of those, throw your binary name in it, and away you go, and you run the Linux command and it runs.
Wow.
We have some docs on the ASP.NET website telling you how to do it for a web app, and the instructions are the same for this. It's just the current docs for a web app have a whole bunch of goop that tells you how to detect if you're running as a Windows service. You don't need any of that now. But other than that, the config file for systemd and stuff is the same.
Wow.
So what I've done here is I opened up the event log, and by default, I've got all these logs coming to the event log, even though I didn't explicitly wire up an event log logger, because we know that you decided to use the event log. If we know that you decided to use a Windows service, obviously you're going to want to use the event log. What else would you use when you're going to do a Windows service, right?
Yeah.
And so you'll also notice I have this stand-up worker source. So it has its own event source. I can filter on it. I can sort by it. I can find all the things that I want, right? One thing to note is this only worked because my user that I was running the service as has permissions to create event log sources. So what you see by default, if you're running as a less privileged user, and what you'll see in preview 3 is this will be application where it says stand-up worker, and you'll have like a big error at the beginning of every every log message saying, hey, you're using the application source, you probably shouldn't do that. So we try now to use an event source with the name of the app. If we can't create it, we'll log a message under the application event log saying, hey, we tried to use this event source, it didn't work. If you create it for it by going and running a command, then it'll use it. Otherwise, you could change it or do what you want, right? Does that make sense?
It does.
That's all kind of there, and you'll see your logs starting to appear. We can see worker running. We can see like application starting, and you'll see anything in here that you would have seen in the console.
Okay.
And anything that would have gone to the console. So it's all configured the same way that your normal log levels and everything would be configured.
So Patrick had a question in the chat. He was asking if there's lifetime events, so you could do some like additional graceful shutdown stuff.
Yeah, so it uses. I don't see that in this combined chat thing. Is there something wrong that you can fix with that, Brady?
Might be a different chat window that we don't see.
That's in YouTube. Don't worry about it.
So the option. So there is lifetime events in. I see Facebook and I see Facebook and Twitch, just not YouTube, but that's okay. The ASP.NET Core has a thing in it. So it has iApplication Lifetime, I believe is the type name. Maybe this one now. Can't remember the exact types, so we'll play around a little bit. Lifetime dot. Yeah, so you have these, right?
Ah, right.
So
Okay.
you can put a callback in here, which gets called during these events. You can also stop the application from within the app, so it'll shut itself down if you do this. You can DI this in anywhere that you want. The other thing that you have is this type here, this background service. It is what's called a hosted service, so it has a start and a stop method. So you could implement the start and stop method from the iHosted service interface. Just remember that and that way you would know when it was starting and when it was stopping, when start was called and stop was called. Just remember that if you do that, to call base start and stop when you're using the background service, so that this method gets called for you still.
And I'm actually glad someone asked that question. This is a conversation Glenn and I had the other day about what if I want to stop my service from within the service? What if I want to stop it from some other thing? It was a very similar conversation. We actually had kind of a debate, like in a microservice topology, would you want your microservice to know how or to have the responsibility of shutting itself off, or would you want some other controller to be able to do that? I think it's really just, it depends on your scenario. So.
Cool. I hope that answers your question. If not, ask John again and he will relay it as appropriate.
Yep.
Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I just right-clicked on my project. I'm going to say add, and I'm going to add Docker support. I'm going to choose Linux, and then this is the Docker file that you get. Now, one thing to note, we talked about this earlier. This is not a web app anymore, so it's not using the web Docker base images. Wow, why did that happen? So it's not using the web base images. It's using the same ones you would get if you added Docker support to a console application. Right? So that has a few interesting things that we're going to talk about. Now, because I'm using nightly builds, there is sometimes problems with lining up the nightly build you have on your machine versus the nightly build that is in the image that is published. So I made my own image, my own base images, which align with the versions of stuff that I've got installed on my machine to make it easier to do this demo. See. So I'm going to switch the base images to that. If you're using once you get these bits and you want to use the released previews, this would be fine because everything will be lined up with your released bits, right? It's when you start doing stuff like I'm doing that things get a little bit more tricky.
Now, Rackman Jr. asked the question or made a comment, which I think we'll both applaud. Cool ad for Docker support on Linux and Windows. That's a good thing. The other day I had one of those random situations where I could build a Linux image on my Windows machine, or I could build a Linux image on my Mac, but I could not build a Windows image on my Mac. So I ended up using, that's a long story. John's got this look on his face. He's like, why would you do that? But it ended up being a long story, but we used Azure Container Registry tasks.
Oh, yeah.
And with tasks, you actually don't have to download the image and everything to your local computer. So in the case of, like, let's say you want to build a SQL server in a Linux image, you don't have to download that big image. Or if you're doing something on Windows, you actually wouldn't have to download the Windows images. ACR Tasks will do all that in the cloud, and they have most of those base images cached. So it goes pretty fast.
Thank you, friend in chat.
Yes, thank you, friend in chat.
Okay.
Oh, there. Missing a highlight. That's good.
So now what I'm going to do is do Docker build. Now the Docker files that get generated by Visual Studio are rooted at the solution level deliberately, so that because you can like have class libraries and things like that. In general, it's frequently what you want with .NET. So this is slightly more complicated than you might have seen before if you're new to Docker, but it's still just doing Docker build on my image. It's just that I want to give Docker the solution file. Oh, well, that seems suboptimal. Oh, I have these around the wrong way. So this gets me every time. So for those of you trying to play along at home, the first line here is actually the runtime that you're going to use. But you don't use it till down here. And then this one is the SDK, and I had them the wrong way around.
Details.
Yeah. So this is doing a Docker build for me. And so now I have the same application with the same source code running in a Docker image and running as a console app. So one thing that I said I would talk about earlier is shunk. This is my image. Look at the size of it. It's 76 megabytes.
Whoa.
And it includes an OS and all of the .NET I need to run my worker.
That's weak.
Wow.
Docker
Okay.
run.
Do you have a recent one that has an ASP.NET Core app?
No, I don't. But it's bigger than that.
Yes.
I mean, I have this one down here, but I don't know how. That's 4 weeks old. It's a couple of hundred meg, right? But it's probably not a fair test because I believe this is probably using Debian and my one's using Alpine. So I don't have a direct comparison. The question you're really asking here is how big is the ASP.NET shared framework, which includes all of the ASP.NET assemblies in it.
Yep.
Yeah. I'm not 100% sure. So I can do docker run -it -rm /standup worker, and it'll run. Right, so now it's running in an image on Docker on Alpine, and now it's also running. If I go and do start in Windows Service, it's running on Windows as a Windows service. Now, if I say docker push /standup worker, that's spelled right. So now what this is going to do is it's going to push it to Docker Hub. So now if anybody on their machine has Docker and they want to run this worker that I just pushed, they could do so. Or what we're going to do here in the studio is we are going to switch cables because one of our HDMI cables died and we couldn't make it work again in time.
Yeah.
And Brady was prepared and had his dongle plugged in, and he's not doing it right now on the camera. So now what's going to happen?
Hey, this makes it more clear that we're switching over.
Yeah.
It's a different...
So now we're switching over to Brady's machine. So Brady has a Mac, and he's going to do some stuff, and it's going to be glorious.
Theoretically.
So yeah, it's that small because it runs on Alpine, and Alpine is about 4 megabytes, I think, whereas Debian, the default is still Debian because it's got more features, but it's like 100 megabytes.
Mm-hmm.
But you can choose to try and use Alpine, and it's usually fine for most things. Mm-hmm. The big difference is there's a different libc, so if there's anything that hits native code and it's not, you don't have a version for that version of libc, you kind of run out of options real quick.
Now, I think what we've done so far is he's shown this guy running this XE running directly in his console. He's also shown it as a Windows service. We talked about systemd. You got a blog post where you're going to show like actually Linux service, which will be cool. And he's containerized it, and then he's pushed it up to Docker Hub, which we've got right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create what's called an Azure Container Instance, which is essentially it's going to pull this image directly from a registry, and I could use either Docker Hub or Azure Container Registry. I'm going to use Docker Hub because that's what Glenn uses. So what I'll do now is actually say add. I'm going to type in container instance. Type it. Instance. There we go. I've got container instances right here. I'll go ahead and hit create, and we'll just call this guy stand up. Call it stand up worker instance, and it's going to be a public image. And see here, Glenn C stand up worker. I'll go ahead and paste that guy here.
No, I can't see.
I can't see. Oh,
all I can see is the other window that you have open.
Here, you want to move that?
Yeah, you're maybe sharing the wrong screen.
I mean, you're extending, not duplicating, right? What's going on here?
I'm extending. Excuse me, I'm duplicating. It should be in the portal.
This is your machine. Like you have that window open somewhere, and that's what people can see.
That's weird. Because I'm using a different tab.
Hmm.
It's not moving around.
Okay.
Let's try again. Sorry. AV. No signal.
The demo gods are after us today.
They really are. Oh. Yeah, that's not refreshing.
Okay. Your Mac is no good?
Mac is no good now. That's
okay.
a bummer.
So
I saw your mouse moving around quickly after you plugged it back in.
Okay.
Okay. Odd.
So instead,
you can go to the portal.
Yeah, I can go to the portal.
So Glenn can go to the portal. He can do this.
Sure. Okay.
And just so everybody knows, we have a blog post that is currently being reviewed by our devs and wonderful other PMs on the team. And they're actually reviewing this. We're going to have a blog post coming out this week on how to use the worker around ACI. And then we'll probably have a follow-up post on how to do it, how to use the worker with Kubernetes. So what Glenn's going to do here is he's going to say new container instance.
I'm looking at how good search is because like I literally typed Azure Container Instance and it didn't come up.
Weird. You want container instance? I think. Anyway, all right. So just give it a name here, and then you know your path. Glenn C.
That's
stand
the
up
image
worker.
name.
That's the image name. Okay. You just give it a different name there.
Mhm.
And then you want to select background workers because that's where we've got it.
Oh, you have
You already have a
one?
resource group.
That one?
Okay, that one's fine. And then what you'll want to do is click that guy and go to the next thing. And then on this one, you can actually turn off. The public IP address because we're not going to need a public
Yep.
public
No,
IP address.
no web.
No web. And then I think you're good. You can pretty much click OK. If you wanted to set an environment variable, like let's say you wanted to set the .NET Core environment to development, you could do that here. And any other environment variables that you might have, you can actually set those up. I've never done that, so your own.
Doing it live.
Doing it live. Hit OK. Hit OK here.
Nah.
Oh, kill it. We don't need it.
That was just a syntax thing.
Oh,
Anyway.
okay,
I just needed
okay.
to change. Yeah.
And then that's weird. We're just lucky today.
Mhm.
What is it called?
That's because I clicked in environment variables and now it's
Yeah.
There you go. Should say OK.
Why didn't you do this in your blog post?
I did. It's weird.
Yeah. Okay. This is probably not something that we want to do then. Go here.
You don't use colon, you use something else, right? You use
That's right.
We'll just go.
Yeah. But what's weird here?
That's weird.
So I'm gonna like talk about this for a moment because it's interesting. What's going on here is like it now knows that I tried to do an environment variable, so people can see like it's just like will not let me say I don't care about this environment variable thing anymore. It keeps saying, hey, no, you tried to use an environment variable, and I'm like, yeah, I know, I got it wrong. I don't care that much. I'm not in love with this environment variable. For the love of God, make it go away, right?
yeah.
But it doesn't want to do that. So now I'm going to say Glenn C / stand-up worker, and then I'm going to like select my resource group, okay, and never touch the environment variable. Say no to the public IP address. Okay, right?
There we go.
So what was weird there is like the portal had kind of got fixated on the fact that I clicked in this environment variable box once, and
They really wanted
me to put an environment variable in there. I was like, "Hey man, you forgot the environment variable."
No, you really want to configure this.
So it was interesting.
So maybe the whole thing needed to be quoted, or the name
yeah, I mean,
of this.
it was just a special character quoting thing. I wasn't super interested in it. I was hoping to just ignore it and move on. And Brady will put it in his blog post now because I've like outed him on stream. Now he knows he has to go find out and make sure everybody knows.
That's perfect. So what's actually happening here is that we're actually taking that image out of ACR, or excuse me, out of Docker Hub. If it was ACR, I'd be pulling it out of there, and basically taking that container image, creating an instance of it, and then running that instance. So in a minute, Glenn can actually go to his resource group view, which it should already be there. I'll do it over here. He can go into that background workers resource group, and then he would see his stand-up worker. And if he clicks on containers,
look at it.
It's already there. But he clicks on containers, and then over on the left-hand side, you should see containers. There you go. And you'll see that it's actually started, and now it's partying. And if you were to click on logs, you would see there's your logs already dumping in directly into there for you.
The worker is going. It's alive in Azure.
Now, if Glenn were, and we'll have this in the blog post, if you were to go up there to the overview page one more time, sir. If Glenn were to make a code change and then literally push that, like repackage that Docker container and push that Docker container back into Docker Hub, like he's going to do this right here. John hates avocado. You hate avocado? You live in California. Isn't it like against the California?
He's always messing with me.
Okay. I don't really like
I love the avocados. They're wonderful.
Lies. It says it right here in code.
All right.
So when we were at NDC Sydney, everywhere we went, Glenn remarked that every single meal I had an avocado in some form with my meal. So it's kind of a thing. And it is true.
That's good.
It is true that he hates avocados. You heard it here first, folks.
That's funny. I actually learned how to love them in the last year or two. It took a while.
So yeah, we're doing a Docker push again now. I made a change and I pushed it. Most of it was already there. I only did a little delta, but as we saw, it was only 70 megabytes anyway. So
that's pretty quick. So,
then if I click restart, is that what you're telling me?
Yep. If you click restart, what will actually happen is it will re-pull that image over from Docker Hub or Azure Container Registry or whatever you're using, and it will light back up. So he's already clicked restart. If you go back over to containers,
Yep.
one more time, you should see that it's been pulled and it's already recreated. Here, refresh.
Look, John hates
John
avocados.
hates avocados. There you
This
go.
is crazy.
Yeah.
Wow. So the deployment speed is incredible
Insanely fast.
Yep.
Absolutely
Wow.
insanely fast.
because it's just a delta on the Docker image.
Yep. Exactly right.
Absolutely. Yeah, so the layer, because Docker works in layers like an ogre. And so it only pushes the layers that have changed. And because your app code, your app DLLs are only on the last layer, it only pushes that like one, however big your app is. So in
Very
this case,
cool.
it's going to be kilobytes, right? Probably.
Wow. So then if I wanted to scale this, what's the next step? If I want to have, like, I've got one thing out in the container, like an image registered. What if I wanted multiple?
With ACI, I don't really know. I don't know if with ACI you can create multiple instances. I think it's just one. I'm not sure.
This is not a problem at all.
It's not a problem.
Seems
Is it?
fine.
Oh, is it doing
Seems
that?
good. Look.
That happens. Yeah, I've seen that too. I've seen that in the overview blade. Like if I stop it or delete it, and that's already happening.
The cloud is crying.
Right, but if you were pushing this to, let's say, AKS, now you can set up multiple nodes, multiple instances of that container, yada yada yada. So you could do
Okay.
a lot more with it. And then if you were doing this, now Glenn and I tested this the other day. Like, I have to, disclaimer: this is not a web app. This is a a worker app. It's going to be a different type of thing. You could push it to app service. Now, what Glenn showed is that if you push it to app service, it kind of treats it like it's a web job. You could containerize it and also use it in a containerized web app service. But pardon me, that's a web service, my app service. You could put it in a Docker image and put it up into app service on Linux, but it's not really you could do it, but it's not the really key scenario. Like ACI or AKS are really going to be better for
Isn't there a
containers
way?
for this.
What I was hoping to see in here is that I could make like many instances of this container at once, which I believe is a feature of this, but it's not exposed here. Do you know?
I don't know. I've
Okay.
never done it in ACI. I'm new to ACI.
Okay,
Mhm.
fair enough. Yeah,
And that
so-
might be something, as people are saying in chat, maybe you would use like Kubernetes or something there as well, right?
Yeah, if you're really talking about those more advanced orchestration features, then you get an orchestrator, which is what Kubernetes
Yeah.
is. It starts you up. The container instances will start you up. They'll keep you running. They'll restart you, and when you fail, if you need it to do that, and otherwise they're pretty bare bones, right? Deliberately so. That's the idea, right? And then you start pulling in Kubernetes functionality if you want Kubernetes stuff, where you want. I want 5 of these running at all times, spread across several machines or whatever. Right? And then what happens here is the way this layering works is as you add the Kubernetes functionality, it then can start calling into ACI to use ACI to run nodes for you, to run instances of your things on ACI via its but it takes care of orchestrating it for you. Virtual kubelets, is that what that one was called?
Yeah, that's what it's called.
Yeah.
And I think we have a question here from Steve. Typically, K8 typically has a pull strategy you can define in configuration. Yeah, you can wire that up to Docker Hub to ACR. You can literally configure your AKS cluster to automatically pull directly from your registry whenever there's an update in it. And then obviously you could use Azure DevOps if you wanted to have more explicit control here. You could party on.
Cool. Can I connect? Network.
Yeah.
He's like, stay on target. Stop going off script. Stop it. Stop breaking everything. Okay. Does anybody know why it didn't work just then? First person in chat to tell me why the first one didn't work gets virtual points. Virtual cool points.
Which rewards virtual peers.
Look at this. I'm inside my container. I'm inside the worker right now. It's coming from inside the computer. Nice.
Oh, wait. I've lost count. How many ways have we run a worker now, John? We're up to 6 or 13? What?
Look, it's running. Stand up worker DLL.
Cool.
Look at that. It's using 417% of something. Cool.
Good stuff.
So the method to the madness here, this didn't work because the bash doesn't exist in the Alpine image. So hence I had to choose SH.
Got
So
it.
I knew what that was immediately when it errored out, but it might not be obvious to someone else who
Crazy.
tries to do this
Crazy.
alone
Good to know.
Wow.
because it's that small.
But
John.
that's kind of contingent
John
on.
is shocked. Look at him.
But had you been
Look
using,
at him. He was like, my God, his eyes were really wide.
had you been using the Alpine image, would you have had that problem?
If I was using the normal image now, it would have worked. So it's because it was Alpine. It didn't.
It was the 80B.
Cool. So yeah, ACI. Now that same image will run on Kubernetes. If anybody wants to do that, feel free. It's on Docker Hub now, so you can just download it. It'll run.
I have a Helm file here. I was going to do that, but we can't really.
Can't run your machine. It's okay because we've been here for like an hour anyway.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
believe we're all out of time.
I think so.
Well, this is really cool to see. Like you've been on before. We've talked, about the idea of workers, but it was more kind of like concept at that point, right? And so now we're seeing it actually. Here's the benefit, and you're able to quickly create these really tight instances. They don't have all the web server stuff. They don't have all the ASP.NET stuff in there.
Yeah.
So. And then it's cool to see the one I do have a problem with the avocado hatred, but other than that, they seem amazing.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's not the worker's fault that you don't like avocados, John.
That's true. It's avocado just ended.
Cool.
So what's next on workers?
So we have I just realized I've become really like Seattle-y. I say so a lot, which is one way to tell that somebody comes from Redmond. We were going to do a lot of work around Linux and systemd, but I'm not sure that we're going to fit that in to 3.0 anymore. So Worker, you probably will see more kind of tooling-y stuff light up. You'll see things like the nested files, and you'll see things like user secrets. You'll see like being able to publish to things. Workers and Insight, does that work? I assume you mean application insights, in which case, yes.
Yes, it does.
But not necessarily the way that you might think. So the default like use application insights method that you remember from ASP.NET kind of assumes ASP.NET. However, there is an application insights logger. So you can do configure logging, and then you can say logger.add application insights, and then all of your logs will go to app insights.
Exactly.
But not everything else that happens in Webland necessarily makes sense. Like the distributed tree, like the thing that measures like requests per second and stuff like that doesn't make sense, right? Because there are no requests.
If that feels like an additional blog post we should probably do, I'll take that one.
Yeah, it was a comment on the blog when I talked about Windows services as well. So we should mention somewhere, probably in most of our blogs. Because everybody who's using App Insights is like, obviously I want the logs to go to App Insights and not this event log thing. Can you tell me how to do that?
I can do it. Sure. Be fun.
Yeah. Worker that pulls avocado 3D files from Remix 3Ds and shows it. Yeah. Or sends it to this 3D printer. There's a 3D printer just off camera here. So we could have it printing an avocado every time John comes on.
I would venture to say that thing doesn't print it.
It's just for show, it seems like.
Rather large.
Yeah. All right. So if there's any more questions, I don't know if do we hang out and wait for more questions. If not, I'll be here. I'll be on Twitter, so you can send me all your questions about workers and tell me all the cool ideas you have for what you're going to do with it. We've already had a few people say, this is really cool. I kind of wanted to do Windows services and stuff, but I wasn't really sure where to begin. And this is where you begin. Or they were like, hey, this is really cool. I've already been doing this. I've just been ignoring the fact that I had web in my workers. I've just been leaving it there and not caring.
Yeah, exactly. So, because there wasn't really a good option to do anything else, right?
No, you could kind of do it. Some people did. They could build things
by
apart
building
themselves.
up.
You can build your way up, but you give away a lot of those conveniences. The other thing that's really important here, or not really important necessarily for you guys, is the layering was a little bit weird. So in now, the work, like ASP.NET Core is a worker, in air quotes. Like it is a hosted service. Just like that worker hosted service that we added. So this kind of fits more naturally as the base of the world now that everything builds upon. All the app models in the world, including, even potentially things like Windows Forms could use this as a base if people were so inclined to do so.
Oh.
I mean,
that looks like it surprised him. So maybe I'm just going to end on that note, on that bombshell.
That's a good thing. we also talked about interesting ways that we could use the worker in a microservice cloud native type context with some Xamarin stuff. So I might be pinging James to come up with some ideas on how we could do there too. Because if you need backend processing, this is the way to do it. So.
Yeah.
Right. Well, yeah, it's been an hour, a little more than an hour, so we should, it's been more than an hour since we were supposed to start.
Yeah, it's been an hour since we started. We don't want to change anybody. There's already going to be enough anger directed at us for all of our difficulties, so we don't want to make it any worse by cutting it short and having the community complaining.
Cool. So The stand-up links are in the thing. We'll update the description, and then if you have links to stuff that you want us to put in the show description, I can add that too.
Okay.
And then folks that are watching, we've got the next .NET Community Stand-up is on Thursday at I think 9 a.m. Pacific, and it's the languages and runtime.
Ooh,
So
be nice. Should
yeah.
be some great stuff.
Yep, awesome.
Thanks.
All right, I think you folks hit a button on the Stream Deck, and the studio self-destructs.
Bye.